This episode is brought to you by Mortgage Workflow Partners and the Mastering Encompass series, both for users as well as administrators. You can find out all the information about it over at masterengencompass.com. Also, if you'd like to check out what we're doing on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to the channel using the @MasteringEncompass handle. And make sure you stay up to date on all the information, not just with podcasts, but also video content that we bring to you as often as possible. Now let's get on to the episode. Hey everyone, welcome to another weekly meeting, Mortgage Community. My name is Larry Bailey, your host with Mortgage Workflow Partners. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thanks for coming. It is roughly 4 p.m. on Tuesday the 8th. So as folks are rolling in, we're going to want to make sure that everybody gets settled in. Today's topic's a big one: how to automate your initial disclosures with Encompass native functionality. So as we're inviting folks in, a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, everyone is automatically muted and their cameras are off. Mine, of course, are always on. So that's the important part. I'm going to go ahead and actually change this over to this microphone because that would probably sound a lot better. Hopefully it does. And what we want to make sure of is that you get the lay of the land here with the Teams piece. Hopefully you saw last week's replay post. We actually put a bunch of notes in there along with the recording and things like that. Hopefully you found some more value. Also some housekeeping stuff for those that have subscribed to us over on YouTube using the Mastering Encompass handle. Thank you very much for doing that. We had 100,000 subscribers, which is completely insane and unexpected. But the good news is the reason why we got there was because I made sure that not only people like yourselves, people in the US can gain access to information, but I actually open it up to where a lot of folks can't get to mortgage.community or even some other resources. So I used YouTube to basically share the wealth and share the knowledge. So that's the housekeeping stuff. Good news is we are here and made it, and hopefully everybody finds these this a little bit easier to get onto than the native meeting functionality within the mortgage community. So today's topic, going back to that, how to automate your initial disclosures with Encompass. First of all, and you can use your reactions if you don't mind, but who is in the mood to automate your initial disclosures? Is that something that you're willing to allow have happen? I'd love to see also in the chat if you think that's a good idea, not a good idea, that kind of a thing. One of the pieces that I've always talked about in automating initial disclosures is that a lot of folks say no. They say, listen, we don't really like it. And it's like a global statement. And that doesn't have to be that way. So in chat, Luba says, I love to, but we're on Blend. The good news is that this kind of functionality is going to be coming to every POS or outside method that you distribute your disclosures. It's coming to everyone reliably here by the end of the year with 24.3 according to ICE. So be on the lookout. I'm not quite sure what Blend will do with that, but you got to ask them, right? And then Alex says, looking at this for HELOC specifically, and that's one of the beauties. So I'm going to show you here on what I've done and how to do it, Alex, so you can give it a shot. The other part that usually comes up heavily in this conversation is data validation. So there's a provider out there that does initial disclosure automation. I think it's a great product. I think it's a great opportunity to learn what you can do natively, though. I'm always workflow before technology. And one of the things that is historically problematic with sending out disclosures is the quality of the data. So one of the things that as you go through my pretend workflow that I'm going to show you here, some of the things I'm going to talk about you may not be doing. Those things in particular are third-party fees, right? So whether you're using Smart Fees or Lodestar or something else, you're going to have to figure out a way. You could be using DDM rules depending on your company, but you've got to figure out a way to reliably get data in there to automate. So that's number one. Number two is you've got to make sure that you've got your disclosure packages set up properly. So going back to the HELOC for Alex as an example, when you're working with HELOCs, if you're using everything native, really nothing to do. But if your company has a particular initial disclosure that you want to send out with that HELOC package, you might have to create a custom plan code or an aliased plan code for your initial disclosure packages to go out properly. Those kinds of things, because I'm sure you know this, but there's no such thing as an investor-specific initial disclosure package or a program-specific initial disclosure package. That's called an alias plan code. Hopefully you know how to do that and configure that. But if you don't, if you really truthfully don't think like you're supposed to like just organically know what to do, please ask a question. With Teams here, you can, if you want to raise your hand, I can open up your mic and or your video. So if you have any questions while we're going through this, let me know. And certainly if you're watching this on replay and you have any questions, please post it in the community. That's why it's there. All right, let's get into some cool stuff here before my screen logs me out. Let me go ahead and share screen. You guys should be seeing Encompass Admin. Give me a thumbs up. Let me know you're seeing it. I wish I knew of a way to do this on Teams. It looks like it's sharing, but just to make sure. And the idea is that RSVP, guys. Nobody's RSVPing. They're not paying attention. They're not paying attention. So remember, if you're talking to anybody and they're having trouble getting into the event, just remind them to RSVP. They'll get a link and you'll get to the event. So again, as I said in the very beginning, there will be some challenges with new technology, but hopefully we'll get through this quickly. So on screen, you should be familiar with this, right? And this is the admin setup. If you're not familiar with this, I want you to go to encompass.ice.com, log in with your credentials, and you will land squarely on this page. If you're not landing on this page, then you are not a super administrator, and you're probably landing on this page with your loans. Totally fine. So going over into admin, a couple things you need to first configure, right? And so if you're going to be doing automation with your fees, or you're going to be doing automation with perhaps fraud, other things that you want to configure ahead of time, you're going to want to go into services management, and you're going to want to configure automation rules. As a reminder, automation rules is step number 1 of 2 to get things to work automatically or lights out in Encompass. First step is to create the automation. So in this particular example, I use this as just an easy one. Remember that the automation rule may have conditions. And so how do you know that? Simply go into the automation rule, then go into the service order and look here. If you have any conditions in this condition editor, it's totally fine. But remember, you're not going to actually get the service to run if the conditions here are not true. So be mindful of that, be careful of that, because if you don't replicate these readiness conditions in the workflow rule, you could have a situation where the workflow rule fired perfectly fine and the service was requested perfectly fine, but it's going to fail, and you're going to be confused as to why it failed, and it's because of this, if that condition isn't met. Because it won't give you a fail that the service condition wasn't met. It'll only give you a fail if the service order didn't happen all the way. All right, so first step is automation rule. And you can see there's a whole bunch of different options here. If you're confused about who is available, enter Larry, who is available on here, you can come over into Marketplace, come over into Encompass Partner Connect integrations. And then once you're in here, you can see all the different folks that are available. So we talked about Flood there for a second. which is under, I don't even know, oh, right in front of me. Telling you, I'm getting old. And on here, again, we've got 3 different kinds, right? And so the ones that we're looking for here are automated, one-click, or manual. Obviously, automated means just that. One-click means it's like services password management, where you store the company credentials and then the user takes action. And then manual is where the user takes action, they enter in their own credentials. Heads up, by the way, heads up for those that have TPO integrations, you now have new TPO actions that include in your setup, where you can have TPOs do one-click service order or a manual service order. So if you didn't know that, be mindful of that while we're here. All right, so that's how you do that. When we're coming back over into here, then the second part of that automation, of course, is coming down into workflow management, going to workflow rules. And if we look for ordering service, here's that rule that I'm running, right? And so if I edit that, the field value modified in this particular case is a milestone getting finished. Remember that the triggering event on here is any change, whereas the conditions are what control the evaluation as to if there's going to be a result. And the result in this case is ordering a service and flood. All right. So how does all this tie into initial disclosure automation? Well, the whole point is while your team is working on the quality of the 1003 that you're going to produce these initial disclosures for, whether it's inside Encompass or outside of Encompass, the point is that we want to make sure that when that file is being worked on, we are in a good spot to prepare for disclosures. Part of this conversation was all about data validation. So do you mind if I show you guys how I solved for this? So I'll show you the end result, and then I'll show you kind of how it works. If I can help you with this, obviously, let me know. I'm going to go over into my handy dandy enhanced conditions loan. And I'm going to take you into something I've shown you before, which is my quick qual for LO. This is a custom input form. And one of the things I built here was initial disclosure review. So I've got, in this particular example, Candace, I'll grab your question in 1 second. In this particular example, what I've done is I've built in layered custom field calculations that go into different sections of different parts of Encompass. And I've reversed waterfalled them, or upward cascaded them into a dedicated custom field, which prepares or disqualifies the file for initial disclosures. And so as you can see on here, I've broken down application, program, file contacts, disclosure, services, and Mavent. And yes, this is on Encompass Web. Yes, I also have this on Encompass Desktop too, so it doesn't really matter. They both look identical, although I got to be honest, this actually looks a lot nicer on web than it does in desktop, just because, I don't know, it just does to me. Candace, let's take a question here from chat. So Candace, when you have more than one action set up, do you know if it goes in order similar to DDM? In terms of the sequencing of services, if they're all set to go, they all go at once. So I think what you're asking is, Candace, is like, does one thing happen and then another thing? And my question to you is, does it matter? So in other words, I'll use an example like flood, right? So let's say that you wanted to automate the flood and you wanted to wait for the flood determination to come back before you went to the next step in your sequence. You don't want to order all these services until that evaluation comes back. That would be part of your workflow. That would be part of your results analysis to make sure that these other things don't happen until that condition exists. So I don't know if that's what you were asking, or if you were just curious about the general, like literally the general order. And when I've done this, I'll come back to this in 1 second. Let me just address Candace's question. So earlier, I did a couple different automations on loan creation. And so let me just grab this good and I'll go back to show you. So Candace, when I search by Loan Good, we can see all these things happened, right? And so, all these things happened all at 9:59 a.m. Updating custom field happened later, which is interesting. I still have a case with ICE on that conversation. Candace adds, sorry, not really talking about services. WF in general, like multiple auto assigns in a rule. I don't know. Do you want to talk it through on mic, Candace? I mean, it sounds like you've got something specific, and I'm guessing you're not the only one that's got that question. So you said no. Okay. Sorry. So if you're doing multiple auto assigns, I'm going to try and take your question. If you're doing multiple auto assigns in your workflow rule, you mean like auto assign roles, those kinds of things? So if you were to come in, like, give me an idea, what are we assigning? Help me. Yes, roles. Okay, great. So if we come over and we assign a role, we can come over and assign a role, and we can come over and assign a role. If I can click on the right thing, right? And if this role is for a funder, and this role is for an accounting, and this role is for a post closer, yeah, which will happen first? They'll all happen simultaneously. So is that good for you, Candace? There's this thing that we've all been used to in terms of sequencing. So again, what I would encourage you to think about is if your sequence is important because you need to make determinations within the sequence, then it's not a true complete sequence. It's a process. So consecutive versus concurrent, I'm sure you guys know what that means, but so Candace adds, okay, so we have to get very specific on our conditions. Yeah, you do. Better get specific on your conditions, unless you want a general outcome. So again, the idea is this post closer. I only want to assign this guy as post closer if the loan officer equals Johnny, right? Or the underwriter equals Sally, or the loan type is FHA, streamline, cash out, refi. Who the hell knows? Yeah, get specific with your conditions, 100%. Keep in mind in here, you don't have the ability to use your condition builder. So if you need to cheat, I cheat here, get the syntax that you need, and then paste it over here where you really need to paste it. Again, I'm a big proponent right now for everybody. This is what I use, unless it's like a single field reference. But if I'm getting into layered conditional statements, especially if there's parenthesized and ors, those kinds of things, I'm using my query builder, and then I'm pasting those results accordingly. Candace, how are we feeling? Is that good? I'm going to go back to doing what I was doing. Awesome. No more sticking tongue at me, Candace. All right. So going back to this process. So the idea is if you're a loan officer, right? And you go into doing this part and you talk to the borrower, everything's good. You run the credit, you get your pricing, everything still is good. We go into liabilities, we mark stuff off, everything feels good. We come over to reviewing the cost of the file, borrower's great. We go into the application now, we complete the 1003. At what point do we order the fees? At what point do we go to the itemization to make sure it's okay? What about the ATR-QM? If it's unlocked versus if it's locked, how do you handle the ATR-QM points and fees validation? All these kinds of things. What about Mavent? How do you address that? So in sequencing this out and automating this, one of the things that you have to determine is how much of that matters. I know this might sound crazy. Ooh, I'm keeping Sean out. Sorry, Sean. Sorry, Sean, I didn't see you up there. In terms of making sure that you've got the right workflow, don't think that every file needs to be perfect to send out initial disclosures. Work with your compliance team. Find out what is actually required to send out on initial disclosures to get that process through. When you go into, if I go back over into QuickQual and I go into this validation, this process was intense for some of these, and others it's not. So when I worked through this workflow, to deliver this out to a client situation. Different things happen at different levels, but the good news is, as long as the business understands what it is that they're okay with going out, everything's fine. So some good examples here are Maven, right? On Maven, do you need an overall pass? Maybe. It depends. Are you going to get an ATRQM on an unlocked file? Probably. So is that okay? If your 2015 itemization isn't completely filled out with Ken Shop, Did Shop, obviously no Did Shop on LEs, but Ken Shop or not able to shop, how do you deal with that? How do you deal with lender credits? Those kinds of things. And then, of course, dealing with your SSPL is determined based upon if you're using templates or if you're using third parties, those kinds of things. So all of this is custom field calcs, gang. It's all done in sequencing custom field calcs. There's no advanced crazy logic on this whatsoever. And what happens next is up to you. So even if you don't want to automate disclosures because your business isn't prepared, one of the things that you can do is, if you use that methodology, you can go through and make sure that whoever they are, loan officers, disclosure desk, whatever, you can make sure that they can't click the disclosure button until they're actually ready. Now, one of the nice things with Encompass Web is, A, you have to have one-time passcode set up, so you don't need to worry about setting authorization codes. B, you can see in the background, you can see how these plan codes fill in. So one of the things that you can do is make sure that the one that shows up is the one that fits best for your loan program, depending on what you're doing. And then lastly, loan audit happens. So when you go through these steps, if there's a problem with the loan that Maven's going to find, as well as field level challenges, you'll find it in the loan audit well before you get to documents, and of course before you get to senders and recipients. When it's lights out, when it's automated, none of this actually has to happen. You'll basically set up the automation rule. So let me go back to admin, and we go back to workflow rules, and I'll go back into send disclosures automatically. So in this particular example, I set a custom field, and that custom field is a calculation of all those other segments that I just showed you that cascade up into this field. And when that field changes, you can go over into the conditions and we can say, listen, only under these circumstances am I okay to send out disclosures. So in this case, it was conventional loans only, purchases only. The LTV has to be under 80. That custom field has to be a yes. It still has to be active, and it better not have any initial disclosures sent. And it's only for banked retail. And the result of that happening, this being true, is to send out disclosures. That's this action right here. And so when I go out and send disclosures, one of the other things you can do is a nesting feature. And I'm going to show you a PDF that hopefully you have at your fingertips. If you don't, I'm going to make sure you know where to find it. But it results in sending out, creating these nesting actions. The first one is to send out notification that you create within the notification templates. So on the successful completion of those initial disclosures going out, you send an email out to a group to notify them like, hey, disclosures for Larry went out. If it fails, you can do whatever you want. In my particular example, which is what's in best practice here, I'll show you in a second, is to create a task. Now, if you're not using workflow tasks, this is not your best practice. This is just a best practice. You could send out a notification on failure, and it could be like, hey, that file failed for initial disclosures, go, deal with it. That kind of a thing. Or maybe setting a value in a custom field to have it appear on someone's pipeline view or dashboard to go manage it. So hopefully this is making sense. Again, this is automation discretely, meaning or discreetly, meaning that it's happening in lights out. You can also use this to be a button click where they say, yep, go ahead and send disclosures. Today in a lot of companies, that button click, like go, I'm ready to have you send disclosures, whoever you is sending an email to a team of people or possibly updating a custom field to get it on their pipeline view for them to go. Because even if the app date was made, some teams have a workflow or a dashboard, right, Candace? Some teams have a workflow that doesn't send out the initial disclosures until day 3 or earlier, depending on if that button is clicked. And to Candace's point, a dashboard, preferably, is used to indicate that disclosures are ready. Alternatively, you can just set that custom field to go here, and disclosures go out for the loans that you're comfortable with in the blind. And they go out to the borrower, and everybody's good to go on that. All right, so if you go back in the workflow rules, you'll see up here at the top, hopefully you've not X'd it out. If you have, good news is, here's the link. And so I'm going to go ahead and put the link for this PDF in the chat. So that's in there if you want to grab it. Basically, if you haven't read this, it's a solid read. It lets you know all what you have to do to basically set these up. If you've not gone through these yet, I encourage you to. There are hyperlinks. These are now colored blue, so you can easily see what they are. So please go ahead and kind of deal with those nested notes in there. But yeah, go through here and test things out. As I said earlier today, I did a couple of tests, workflow rules for File Started. In that File Started, I tested out the results of ordering a service, updating a custom field, creating a task, and starting a scheduler for some other things I wanted to do. So it's pretty cool. And again, from a practicality perspective, if I know that I want my sales team to kind of hustle, especially if they're consumer direct, I want to have them hustle through not only an application, but ultimately get through, is a file ready? If something fails, by the way, what I've done here is I've called out the field ID so that they know exactly where to go. Now on web, there's no Control G, so it's a little bit tough. But as a reminder, you can come up here and type in a field ID, hit enter, and it will tell you exactly where that field appears. And if you click on it, it will load the input form, and it will even put a box around the field that you searched for. So that's kind of cool if you didn't know that already. So that's my conversation for today. Does anyone have any questions? You want me to show you anything? Are you going to do it tomorrow? Are you going to do it ever? What's funny to me is when I go through this kind of a thing, if you don't do TPO business, this might seem really scary, but what's really wild is when I work with TPO lenders who have no problem letting brokers self-disclose through TPO Connect, but they still don't let their loan officers to self-disclose. I don't get that. So hopefully this has been helpful to show you what's possible within here. Angela asks, what's the difference between entering the conditions on the results tab and the conditions tab? Oh, great question. So it's a sequence, Angela. So when we go in here, I'll go back to this guy because it's got 1 out of the 2. So this is the thing that happens that causes the rule to move. And the thing it moves forward on is based upon this condition section. So if this condition section is true, it then goes to the results. Now, in this particular case, I don't have any results here, right? But if I go back to, if I only wanted to make sure that, I'll go to this guy here. If I wanted to only make sure that this task was created based upon the following true statements. So, if I didn't want this to go out always, I can make sure it only goes out if this is true. If I didn't want the service to always order, I only wanted it to order when this was true. So hopefully, Angela, that makes sense in terms of why we have conditions here, because this is should the entire rule work. And because we have multiple resulting actions, we can host up to 5. Then you can get into the specifics here. And you can have, as you saw me do in the other rule, you can have multiple simultaneous resulting actions of the same thing. So I can have 5 services that I order here, all with different service rules, or I can have the same service ordered but with different service outcomes based upon a condition. So maybe MI gets automatically, well, they don't have MI ordered automatically, but maybe fraud. Maybe fraud gets ordered with one place for one reason and another place with another reason. So some examples on the fly. Candace has been using them heavily, thus my question if sequences are most restrictive to least restrictive. It's not like that, Candace. It is always as long as the condition is true. And when we think in sequences, I want you to think in nanoseconds. So it's effectively simultaneous. Naturally, everything doesn't always happen like perfectly ideal together, but everything always, how's that movie go? Everything always everywhere. I got that wrong, but you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Anyway, that's me. Thanks for coming today. I really appreciate you guys. Stick with me for the rest of the sequence for October. More great information to come. And any questions at all about this, please post in the comments. Please subscribe, and always let us know what we can do better for you in the community. You guys have a great rest of your day. Thanks. We'll see you. Bye.